Good afternoon, ladies, and welcome to the HeadWraps podcast, powered by Black Women Work. Black Women Work began as an online space for Black women to share challenges and successes, an affirming space for us to love on each other, express ourselves, and cheer each other on as we are navigating so much. Families, children, partners, spouses, careers, dynamics around both race and gender, all while trying to live our best lives. We decided to take our talents to podcasting and created HeadWraps powered by BWW. We're so excited to share our fourth episode, Self-Care for Black Women. My name is Valisa Turner Howard, and I am a wife, a mother, a lawyer, an entrepreneur, and believer that a space like BWW is much needed. I'm excited to introduce my co-hosts and BWW co-founders, Keisha Chambers, Michelle Felder, and Erica Merritt.
Hello, everyone. I'm Keisha Chambers. I am a wife, an engineer, a supporter of girls in STEM. I'm a girl raised in the South. I love to travel. I love red wine, and I am definitely team butter and sugar on your grits.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Felder, also known as Felder and sometimes Minnie Malcolm. I'm an entrepreneur, loyal friend, rebel, and world traveler. I love spirited conversations over cocktails, and I want to experience an anti-racist America in my lifetime.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erica Merritt, and I'm an entrepreneur, a mother, a wife, a lover of science fiction, and an unwavering advocate for racial justice.
Thank you for introducing yourselves. So let's talk about self-care. A little history. The term self-care originally was a medical concept. Doctors discussed it as a way for patients to treat themselves and exercise healthy habits. Later, the term began to be associated with high risk and emotionally daunting professions. So trauma therapists, social workers, EMTs, etc., to combat the stress brought on by their job. Then there was the rise of the women's movement and the civil rights movement, where self-care became a political act. Women and people of color viewed controlling their health as a corrective to the failures of white patriarchal medical systems that didn't properly tend to their needs. An assistant professor at the New School declared self-care was a claiming of autonomy over the body as a political act against institutional, racist, and sexist medicine. Additionally, Black feminist poet Audre Lorde regarded self-care as a matter of survival. She wrote, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." In fact, Audre Lorde revered self-care as a tool of active resistance. In recent years, the term self-care has become a particularly popular topic within the Black community again, appearing frequently in magazines and blogs such as Essence and Madame Noir, not to mention Solange's 2016 album, A Seat at the Table, which featured a song titled Borderline, an ode to self-care. Black celebrities are often asked to tell us more about your personal self-care routines. These practices generally address the physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects of our lives. Some define it by the need to balance and maintain the mind, body, and spirit. It's often referred to as wellness or simply mental health. I want to start our conversation today by talking about what self-care means to you. When you think of self-care, what is the first word that comes to mind for each of you? What does self-care look like for each of you right now? And has that changed over your progression into from child to adulthood?
The word for me is privilege.
Mm.
For me, it's wellness, but that includes mental, physical, and spiritual.
My word is essential. That's what comes to mind for me.
So what does it look like for you right now? Like if you're doing a self-care day or you're thinking about self-care for yourself, what does that look like? And also unpack your word, because Michelle's word was full of like, what does that mean? I need to know.
It was full of Michelle.
Little Malcolm.
I guess maybe it's the word itself, because the activity around the word and some of the descriptions that you provided for the word and some of the context that you provided for the word are just those things. There's something that just, I don't know, irritates me about that word, self-care. So it's not that I don't practice it, but I don't call it that. So I don't have a self-care routine. I have my daily routine, which sometimes consists of taking time for myself. I don't have a self-care journal, calendar set. It's just today I'm going to take a walk, my therapy day, my sip and chat with friends day, my cry in the shower day, my, dance around my home to loud music and have fun day. Like, I do it, but I don't call it or classify it self-care. I just don't. It's something about that word that just does not sit well with me.
And we're going to talk about that later. So Keisha.
For me, and very similar to Michelle, it's not something that is prescribed, so to say. I have not sat down and put anything in writing to say, I'm going to do this on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, take a break on Thursday and start over. It's really just ongoing activities. So making sure that I touch on things that address my spiritual self, which is, participating in church, participating in Bible study, or my mental self is just making sure I have time to do the things that I enjoy. And then physically, I make sure I eat right. Just this last weekend, I went to the store, I was like, buy vegetables. So I just bought a bunch of vegetables, and that's been on the menu for the week. But I think it's just being more aware of the things that I can do to make sure that I am my best physical, mental, spiritual self.
Yes, appreciating the gift of life.
Erica?
Go on, Erica.
Yeah, I in some ways I would echo what Keisha and Michelle described. I don't necessarily declare it or name it, but I do see it as essential to our survival. So let alone the possibility of thriving, right? In the context of COVID, in the context of racism and all of the other things that weigh us down, right, as Black folks, and very specifically in this conversation as Black women. I think I do see it as like taking care of ourselves. I do see that as an act of resistance. I really appreciated the way you frame that and connect with it. I think of, it's funny when Michelle said privilege, one of the things that came to mind for me was I have always thought about work-life balance, which you talked about too. I've thought about that as privilege, very specifically, because I'm pretty darn sure that my mother was never afforded the opportunity of sitting around and trying to decide how balanced her life was. That was just not a reality for her, in the context of the conditions that she lived in, and just what her life was. And so I think that when it is tied to fluff, it falls along this vein of privilege. So when self-care is bubble baths and spa days and those kinds of, not that those things aren't valuable and not that they can't be a form of self-care, but when it is sort of whittled down to the sort of those superficial things, I tend to think about it more along that vein. But when I think about it more broadly around like how am I taking care of myself, and I think about health, wealth, relationships, and vocation, Those are usually the 4 categories. And then of course the spiritual wellness as well as a part of that. But yeah, so I feel like I'm rambling, so I'm gonna stop. But those are the things that come to mind for me.
So, I guess I'm on the flip side of it, of that, because I don't name it, because I don't consciously think about it, I don't take enough time for myself. I don't do enough in terms of what's called self-care. And that, as I have gotten older, has become an issue around balancing and doing things for myself versus things for everybody else. And so I understand the stigma or the stereotypes around self-care, but I wonder if you know, what if that's one of the reasons some women don't prioritize self-care, is that they don't even think about it. It's not even in their lexicon. They're just doing. You know, is there a stigma around engaging in self-care, especially for Black people? Is there a thing about it being a privilege? Is there something about, like, as Erica said, my mom didn't have time for this, I don't have time for this. Or, you know, I have to just live my life and raise my kids and do X, Y, Z. What do you guys think about that? You know,
I would say
sometimes,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry.
No, go
I
ahead.
was gonna say, I don't think my mom didn't have time for this conversation about balance, which I would distinguish in some ways from the concept of self-care. So when and again, like that language was not what she would have used to describe what she did. But one of the things that comes to mind for me is that my mom had some non-negotiables.
Mhm.
So one of her non-negotiables was that growing up, when she was raising me, that Saturday was her day. And
Mhm.
so my dad was responsible for me on Saturdays. And that would often be a day that she would take a break or go do something on her own that she wanted to spend some time doing, right? That was an opportunity for her to not have to be solely responsible for, because my dad was working during the week, and my mom was often throughout my childhood a homemaker. My mother also got up super early in the morning to have quiet time before anybody else got up. I would call that another act of self-care for her, right? And then she would not Sunday, right? She was going to church. Like those are things that were, those are non-negotiables for her. So I think I got distracted by the beeping, y'all.
That's okay.
Those are some
All right.
non-negotiables. You want me to jump in?
I was almost gonna say, should we?
No. Keisha, go on and jump in.
Well,
Yeah.
and from what you said, Erica, about your mom, I think we have some very rooted self-care practices just in our community alone. And we didn't call them, or they weren't addressed as self-care. Specifically, you mentioned, going to church on Sunday. We got up, we went to church, and when you came home, that was it. And I come from Texas where it's a blue law, so you couldn't do anything much on Sunday anyway. But I think it already would have been a practice to where you just had quiet time, like nothing was on, the TV was off, everything was off on Sundays. Also, going back to parenting, home cooked meals. I mean, our parents cooked for us. So we had, fresh food and vegetable in the house. I think there's just a lot of practices that we already had in place that, self-care is what they want to call them now. But I think we were raised with some very good habits. And they are just, some of them are just cultural. They're just what was done in our community. Even when, women, your parents got together with their friends and there was that community and the communion and the laughter, even when, maybe most people thought they had the least, they had the most because they had family, they had connections, and they just had that community. So I think self-care over time has been more prescribed to some very specific activities, but we grew up understanding what it was to take a pause, take a minute. You know, we've all heard our parents say, go and sit down somewhere. That was self-care. One, you're not gonna get your whooping. And two, it was learning how to just be still. And I think we've learned that in many ways. And that's all rooted into self-care and our cultural experiences.
Michelle?
I was going to say, I agree both with what Erica and Keisha said. And Keisha kind of touched on when you posed that question to us, what I was thinking, even when you were sharing, Elisa, about you working on that or feeling the need to work on that. Because I think I would push back a little on that to say that if it looks like some of the things that we talked about, some of the orchestrated things like a massage or a spa or a happy hour, things that we're really not doing now anyway because of environmental circumstances. But even before this time that we're in, if it looks like that, then yeah, I would say that you're probably accurate or whatever that is, even if you don't have time to sit and read a book by yourself. But I think our bodies, if we're lucky enough, will force us into regulating that care. Like even when we let out a sigh, believe it or not, that is a release. That is caring for ourselves. Like you didn't think, oh, I'm gonna go over here in this corner and sit down because little Mason has just took me there and I'm gonna let out this sigh to care for myself. That's not what you think. You just do it because it's a natural part of us seeking that even space, even when we don't acknowledge it. Sometimes when our bodies get, infirmities, when we come down with a cold, when we come down with, a horrible backache and we haven't been in some type of an accident, but our back is aching because we've been on our feet too long, right? So your body it gets you to a point where you can't continue to walk. You have to sit down. You have to, take a Tylenol or a leave to relieve that. And you have to sit down. It gives you a cold so that you can rest, so that you can get some uninterrupted sleep. So I think our bodies are naturally respond to helping us as much as it can if we don't, continue to abuse them or take them for granted. And I think some of the more, I don't want to call them superficial because a lot of times that sounds, I don't mean it in a negative way, but the things that are outside of our natural day-to-day practice is we do these things. We pray, as has been mentioned. We sing in the car to a song. That is all doing it. It's just the reason I think why that word strikes a nerve with me is because maybe I feel like it's something that others have like manufactured what has been happening since humans have been on, like it's nothing new. Like you didn't discover self-care, it's been there. It's built into the way that we as humans, death is a form of self-care, it's just, yeah, it just is. It's a part of the cycle of humanity, of the human existence, I think, or not even humans, even living existence, living things.
So it sounds like we come back full circle to there's not a stigma. It's not that we don't prioritize it. It's that we're doing it all the time. It just may not look like what a magazine says it looks like or what a TV show tells you it should be. Perhaps it's different culturally for different people. But I want to hit on something that Michelle talked about, and that's when we get infirmities. So a 2019 study found that in the United States, Black women represent 14.4% of the female population and 52% of the African American population.
This is in the United States, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yet exceed all races in mortality for heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes. Black women are second in cancer incidence, but first in mortality with top cancers, including lung, bronchus, breast, and cervical cancers. 59% of Black women aged 20 and above are obese. 44.8% have hypertension. Black women are double the percentage points of all other groups on low weight infant births and infant mortality, and represent most new cases of chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, HIV infections. In addition to this, according to the National Partnership for Women and Families, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in pregnancy-related deaths than white women. This data illustrates the risk Black women face when it comes to their health. Is there any thought around whether Black women would have as many chronic health conditions in this day and age if we practice self-care, whatever that means for you, early and often? If we didn't wait until it got to a fever pitch, whatever your stressors are, whatever is going on in life, and then, try to seek some sort of mental health counseling, whatever it is. What if, like Keisha talked about, our children and all of us were taught early on how to sit down somewhere, how to be still, how to do nothing. It seems that, I'm sure we've all talked about it, before COVID hit, it seemed like life was running at 110%. Always had somewhere to be, something to do, something, da, 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 da. And that wasn't just us, that was also kids. They are in this activity, this, nobody is sitting down and doing nothing. And that really hit home for me. Last week, my acupuncturist said, you know what I want you to do? I want you to do nothing. Sit down somewhere and do nothing. And I did that this week several times. And I have to tell you, I feel much better about life in general, about what needs to go where, and just sitting for 15 minutes, as Michelle said, somewhere and doing nothing. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that some of these incidences of health issues with Black women would be less if we practice more self-care early and often?
So I'm going to suppress Minnie Malcolm right about now.
And I'm not saying that we know there are other reasons.
I think that you cannot, I think there's some value to that, but I think the environmental racism, the medical racism, workplace racism, education place racism, at the grocery store racism. I think the last part, the grocery store is factual, but a little being a little cheeky there. But those other three are serious issues that contribute to those statistics, right? The medical statistics, it's not, with the unfortunate rates of pregnant women dying during childbirth and infant mortality rates. I mean, they've told us that it's not, when all things are equal between a Black woman and a white woman, education, salary, position, home life, all those things are equal, our sisters still die on that labor and delivery table, right? So what is that? That's an external factor that is killing us. And so it's hard for me to say that, oh yeah, if we sat down and chilled, if we went to the spa, if we laughed with our girlfriends, if we went and did snow angels out in the snow, we would live. I don't believe that. Now, there are some things that contribute to some of the medical things that we have going on with our diet. But some of that diet situation, again, is environmental racism, access to food, access to, actual food, not stuff in a store, but actual foods. It's just, I think until we can get those other things resolved and actually acknowledged in a way and at a level that they need to be acknowledged, I think equating those issues to self-care, it does it a disservice. And to me, it's borderline disrespectful. Not you being disrespectful, but the people who pose those questions.
So, but before you guys answer, Michelle, think about the way Audre Lorde, described it as radical resistance, and she was talking about against racist and racism, and me taking care of myself and making sure that I have what I need to be healthy is pushing back against all those things that you mentioned that are killing us. Um, and so I think there are different ways to think about self-care. But go ahead, Keisha and Erica.
I was gonna say the visual that came into my head when you were reading all of those, the statistics and the outcomes for us, like heart disease, cancer, stroke. All I saw was like Batman and old school Batman and Robin, where all of those things were flashing at him and they would
Yeah,
pop up.
the boom,
Pow,
the bang,
pow,
yeah,
pow. I feel like, and it's always something we are going to be fighting with, but overarching all of that is just life stress. As Black women, we just have so much stress on us. And in some instances, the single mother household, she's trying to raise her family, do the best she can for her children, and not maybe having that time to sit down, unfortunately. It's just right, trying to keep up at your job and make sure that you're being seen and heard and respected. It's all of these different factors that just are building into this stress. And not just, also then there's genetics, high blood pressure. I have high blood pressure. I've had it since I was in my 30s. And look, I would exercise, I would eat right. I stopped my sodium content because my parents had it. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna tackle this early. I'm just not going to use salt. But guess what? It's genetic. It's not even something that I have been able to control through these self-care practices that they tell us about. So, how do you manage all of that and balance all of that? So yes, there's definitely a very significant disparity that is truly disrespectful to us as women, and just to us as a Black community as a whole. But all of those factors, yeah, it saddens me. And I do wish that there were ways that we could, afford more women to be able to, do some of these, not even just the self-care that we consider prescribed, but just some of the ones that are innate, that our bodies are telling us to do, that even sometimes as our bodies are saying sit down, they can't even sit down. They don't have that opportunity.
Yeah, as I'm listening, my mind is just like flying. I have all of this stuff in my head about like the intersection of race and class in particular, right? And gender in this case, because we're focusing on Black women, and thinking how often we collectively have these conversations. And I know, the toll that life and stress and all of these other things have on us, even, thinking beyond the four of us, but also more broadly, our group of friends. And in large part, I mean, I'm sure where we fall on the continuum in terms of socioeconomic status is not the same across our entire friend group, but we are probably, for the most part, on the higher end than a lot of Black women. And to think that if we're struggling, right, from that place, then what does that mean for so many other people that don't have perhaps either the socioeconomic support or the safety net? One of the things I was thinking about when Keisha was speaking is the way in which COVID has pulled, when you mentioned single motherhood, I have had the experience of both being a single mom and not being a single mom, right? And the way that I survived and the way that we thrived in the context of single momming was our support system, right? I co-parented with my girlfriends, right? We all worked together to take care of our kids collectively. And to think about the way that COVID has made it so difficult for people to maintain the networks that were probably lifelines for them before, because you can't, just mixing households is so risky right now. And I'm sure some people still are, right? Or maybe some people have to because they can't not do that in order to work or whatever else they need to do. But I'm just thinking about like the way in which there are other variables that make all of these things even more challenging. I do think there are things that we can do though, right? Even though we have all of these barriers and maybe it does feel insurmountable, it's not, and I don't think anyone's saying this, but it's not a throw up our hands because there's nothing to be done, right? Even in the context of all of this, I think we're all trying to find ways to do our best. So just to be really transparent, one of the things that I've done for myself in this last year is get a therapist, because and I was anticipating, particularly like over the summer, at least we could be outside, right? And maybe have some socially distanced and safer interactions, masks and those kinds of things, and get more exercise. And I was like, it's Cleveland. There's not going to be any sun. And I'm in large part going to be relatively confined to being inside, which I get is a privilege in some ways, right? And maybe a challenge in others. And so I was like, I know that I'm going to need some support. And so I proactively found a therapist before, like over the summer. And it's been profoundly helpful for me to have somebody to, listen to me drone on for an hour or 50 minutes or however long it is. And to not have to feel self-conscious about whatever it is that I'm feeling on that day and in that moment, to be able to put that someplace.
So this you and Keisha touched on being able to quote unquote afford self-care as it's uh, currently looked at. And then you just talked about, getting a therapist. There's evidence that the greater one's income, the lower one's likelihood of disease and premature death and other things. And studies show that Americans at all income levels are less healthy than those with incomes higher than their own. And I think, Erica, you just touched on that, depending on your income level, where you might be. But not only is income associated with better health, but wealth affects health as well. So what are your thoughts on socioeconomic status and how that influences whether Black women will engage in, prioritize, or even think about self-care or not? Does that come into, is that a major piece of it, especially if they're thinking about it in terms of, it's gonna cost me some money, whatever it is I'm gonna do?
I definitely think socioeconomic status has an impact on how we care for ourselves. It just, you know, with a certain type of job or career, you may have a certain type of insurance that then can allow you to see the doctor more, or then can allow you to go to acupuncture, or, whatever that policy may look like. And that comes from your socioeconomic privilege, so to say. So yeah, it definitely plays a role. Also, depending on maybe that status, you may have more time. You may have more leisure time to, take the walks, take the bike rides, do some Pilates classes. You have that disposable income to explore some of these other self-help activities. So it just lends, I think, itself to that. Now, not meaning that the less money you have, you still can try to do some type of motion or exercise or some type of practice that'll help you physically, mentally, and spiritually. There's still many things that you can do, but there's still some type of luxury that comes with the thought of self-care, and that luxury is the affordability of some of those practices.
One of the things I just thought about when you asked that question, Lisa, is that perhaps one of the benefits of self-care becoming such a buzzword is that it is something that I hear people of various socioeconomic backgrounds talking about.
Trending, right? It's a buzzword. It's trending.
Which and the value of that, right, is that maybe people who wouldn't have been thinking about self-care before think about it now, or talk about it now, or think about some of the things that they do in that way, or claim that space in a different way than perhaps they would have if it were not something that was talked about so often in so many spaces. And I think about the things that maybe have become more accessible. So thinking about, Instagram as one example, and the way in which there's so many, whether it's yoga instructors or people who do meditation or other things that are talking about those things and making those things, their expertise available in those spaces that might be more accessible to people who wouldn't have access to those things through maybe traditional means, but have access to them through IG or, whatever else, TikTok or whatever else folks might be on. And I know there's a accessibility issue even as we talk about social media, but I think that it reaches a larger swath of the population than maybe would have been true in the past.
Michelle?
Access to money definitely plays a role in access to forms and types of self-care. I also think that our goals or values play a role in that too, because there are people in this world. I mean, it's definitely culturally related to Western society and a lot within the United States. But there are people in the world who have no desire for the things that we are out here desiring to get or working to get or to obtain. Therefore, their need or reliance upon money is not as great because they're not trying to pay for all of the things. And I'm not talking about people who are impoverished or in circumstances like that. I'm just talking about people who are at peace with a simple, if I could call it a simplified life. And they live in a much more simple way. And they would not be considered at the economic status that we're talking about that provides privilege, but they are very much in a good state from a self-care. They practice all of these things. They are Tai Chiing it up on the side of a mountain, and they go home with their tea, and they are reading a book, and they're going out to fish, and they're going to talk to the neighbor on Tuesday, take a walk down the path. I mean, and there's no thought of the things that we strive for, the things that, compel us to want or to get or to, so I think it's a value set that plays into the economics of it as well. And there are people here in the United States who have that same concept of living, tiny house people, or people who go and just live up in the mountains by themselves. They're not stressing like we are, not at all. And they can have a lot of money that affords them the opportunity to go and retire to the mountains or whatever, or they could not. If they just are not trying to, what requires them to live is not driven, by a lot of money.
Well, the follow-up is, do you think that these are Black people in the United States that are doing this?
No. Yes, there are Black people who live in tiny houses, I'm sure. There are Black people who, live up in the mountains because of like choice, not because that's where mama and them and grandmama was born. No, like they chose to go and take their family or themselves and move up and either retire there or, you know, do whatever type of work, you know, that they can from there. So yeah, but that's, you know,
But generally,
about as many Black people who, yeah, never mind. I was,
yeah, generally we are not trying to do that. Hence why we have some of these issues that we have.
yes,
But I'm
we're not
sorry,
trying to do that as Americans overall.
Erica, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was thinking about how, the sister's name is totally escaping me, so maybe y'all can help me. But I was thinking about the sister who started the NAP ministry.
Oh,
I can't remember her name, but I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Oh man. So just thinking about how things like the NAP ministry and, you know, thinking about therapy for Black girls and Sonia Renee Taylor and her, you know, the body is not an apology, and Adrienne Marie Brown and pleasure activism and Girl Trek, right, and Black History Boot Camp and all of these things that really, in a variety of different ways, whether it's about moving your body, whether it's about loving your body, whether it's about laying your body down and putting your mind at ease, or whether it's about going to therapy, or whether it's about, frankly, all the ways that you need to find and can find physical and other kinds of pleasure in life and really claim joy, even in the midst of struggle, right, as an act of resistance. I think
telling us to go out and have orgasms here.
Is that
yes, you should have as many orgasms as you possibly can, however you can, under whatever conditions. Yes. Yeah, for those folks who have read Pleasure Activism, there are a variety of approaches to finding that pleasure. So
pleasure activism.
Her name is Trisha Hersey.
Oh yes, thank
I
you.
Googled it for you.
Yes. And yeah, have all the orgasms. But yeah, so what I think there's so many, and even, you know, the exploration of racialized trauma and all of these other things that are conversations out in the world right now, I think are helping to drive us collectively to be thinking about and doing more self-care.
Yeah.
In a variety of ways. And I mean, I'm naming things that I've been attracted to and, you know, drawn to and been exploring along the way, as particularly over the last many months of trying to find ways to maintain joy.
Right. So as a segue, that's a good segue, Erica. I wanted to talk about any products or apps you've begun to incorporate into your daily routine or your self-care, whatever you call it. Especially during COVID, I've seen a lot of products, apps, organizations, Girl Trek walks, whatever, popping up. And they don't necessarily bill themselves as self-care.
Yes.
But that's what it is, taking time for yourself, thinking about yourself and whatever it is that you want to do. So tell me about some of the ones that you have seen or thought about. Erica named quite a few, or that you have started to engage in. You know, what are some of those that maybe other Black women might be interested in?
So I would say that during this, yeah, Valisa, it rings true for me too. During this pandemic time, I found the Calm app for meditation, which I do every day at 11 o'clock. I also do, I started Duolingo for learning Spanish. And, you know, it's an app maybe. Is the Alexa an app? Yeah, I tell Alexa to play lots of music a lot of times. She's an app, isn't she? Yes, she is. She's on my phone. So that's an app that I use. And then it's not necessarily an app, but I have participated and I'm active in the Girl Trek movement.
Yeah. I think in terms of apps, I really like the Shine app. So Shine is the people of color's answer to Calm, because so many so many of it was a response to like Calm is great, but most of the people on Calm are white, and and so Shine is people of color.
Okay.
And it speaks
people of color
there, and it speaks very specifically to like navigating racism and other things as well that may not come through, that do not come through as far as I know.
Now, how do they do that during my meditative state? Because I don't know how somebody bringing up racism is going to keep me calm.
Well, well, it talks about coping and other things, right? There are little clips, if you will, that kind of talk about how to cope with and how to support yourself, and hopefully make you feel good about being who you are, and those kind of things in a way that don't come through on some of the other platforms. So that's one. There's another one. This is not necessarily for people of color. It's for anybody, I guess. But the 10% Happier app that really talks about mindfulness and mindful eating and those kinds of things as well. So those are two that I have found to be particularly helpful during this time.
I think I'll check out the Shine.
Yeah, definitely. Check it out.
Mindfulness eating isn't really, y'all know I was up making a peach cobbler.
Which was delicious, by the way.
I don't know that I'm interested in the mindfulness.
I'm not in the practice of using apps as a tool, but I'm definitely going to try these to see how they work. I've probably done the opposite when I'm trying to calm or decompress. I stay off of, the apps and tune all of that stuff out, but I can definitely see how it can be used as a tool. My Calm is playing, and I know this sounds crazy, but playing Forensic Files in the background while I go to sleep, because something about that man's voice is very calming.
Isn't that about murder?
I think I'm gonna leave that all the way alone.
It's the lull of his voice. His voice is very smooth and calm. I know it sounds.
Don't they have, what's that stuff called? Is it I'm gonna say it wrong, but
EM, EMSDR or something.
Yeah. Why don't you find one of those channels?
Oh, I found my channel. It works. It works for me.
Like having dreams about
I don't.
Norman Bates.
No. Never do I have like any dreams about that. It's just, but it's more the lulling of his voice that sends me right off to sleep.
We need to find Keisha that voice.
Talk about different strokes for different folks. This is a perfect example. All right, Keisha. We will not yuck your yum. How about that?
Yum. Thank you. It works for me. It works for me.
So I have a question for y'all. How do you connect or not this concept of self-care with the concept of self-love? How does that?
Well, I think. Oh, Keisha.
Go ahead.
So self-care is I think a byproduct of self-love. It's an action, it's an act of love, So when we have love for ourselves, then we do things that demonstrate. We do things that demonstrate that. We act in ways that demonstrate that. Just like when we're not acting in ways that demonstrate our self-love, our self-worth, our self-esteem, that becomes evident in our actions. So I think it's the same. So I think there needs to be a level of self-love in order for there to be a level of self-care. And I think between the two, that the self-love, of course, is the superior thing, because love is the greatest thing just in general, period. So
I definitely think they have they're parallel. One kind of feeds off of the other, but there are instances where it can go dark, where somebody maybe doesn't have the self-love, but they will care for their body only for whatever superficial reasons are out there. And I think that gets evident definitely with this see it, try to emulate it world that we're kind of in, with things being so instantly available or accessible on Instagram or TikTok. You know, the Kardashians, you know, they want that body. So it might not necessarily be that they really love themselves, or maybe their love isn't really defined as the way we think that love would be defined. And they try to, you know, make themselves look at that through some kind of health routine. And I know this is kind of going off into something deep and dark, but somebody can really truly be on the outside caring for their body, but it doesn't necessarily reflect some type of, from a place of self-love. So to say.
Yeah. When you said you were going dark, I wanted to say it's the forensic files. But I think, you know, I was thinking about how the whole thought about self-care can be perceived as being perhaps self-indulgent or selfish, and how as women, and then as Black women, so often we have been encouraged, in, you know, broad generalizations here, to put other people's needs before ours, right? To put the needs of our children, to put the needs of our partner or our spouse, or
community.
yeah, you know, just everything and everyone. And you know, I know it's so corny, but the whole oxygen mask, that has always, the whole idea of putting your own mask on first has always made sense to me, right? So, and if you want to be able to do all those other things and care for other people and contribute to the community, well, you can't do that if you're not here, right? Or if you're not in any condition to do that. And I, you know, speaking for myself, you and y'all know this, that I have been hiding out from COVID-19 since March. And one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot recently is I may not, you know, this thing, as it continues to go on, just who knows, right? What's going to happen. And so, what can I do to get myself in better health, to increase the probability that if something does happen, that it will not take me out of here, or permanently disable me? And you know, what can I do? I can't control that completely, but I can do my part. And so, what does my part look like in really claiming my own self-care in that way, in terms of what am I eating and how am I moving my body and taking care of my spirit and all of those things.
Well, this has been a really great conversation, ladies.
Yeah, I agree. And Erica mentioned it before, you know, we all have to put on our oxygen mask first. We have to take care of ourselves first before we can take care of others. So we have a call to action for everybody that's listening today. And that call to action is, as a radical act of self-love and resistance, we encourage you to slow down. Take time for yourself and protect your mental and physical health and wellness through consistent self-care, whatever that means to you. And basically it means put your oxygen mask on. Take care of yourself, ladies, and thank you for joining us.
Bye.
Love y'all. Take good care.